Okay. Good morning, ladies. We are back. Sorry we missed you last week together. You got to enjoy a solo episode from me last week. Today, we have a really good one. I feel like we're going to cover a lot of ground, hopefully in a not too long of a time, because there's a lot to cover. We're going to be talking about coming to terms with your past today as a part of our healing. And we've been talking about it all week, right? So nothing new here, but I wanted to lay a little kind of groundwork as far as where we're headed today. If you do not know, both Kristin and I have been reading the book How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole LePera. So a lot of what you are going to hear today is pulled directly from chapter 3 of this book, and it is full of all kinds of truth bombs, mic drop moments, times where you just want to hit yourself in the head and go, oh my gosh, how did I not know this? So just to give you guys a little context on where we're headed today, we're going to talk about a new way to look at trauma, because we've been kind of dancing around this idea of trauma as a part of healing and what is trauma. We're going to talk about common ways trauma manifests for us, a new definition of trauma, the way we are conditioned in our childhood, the archetypes of childhood trauma, which I think will be really interesting for a lot of people, maybe you haven't considered, coping with trauma, what comes up as we learn to cope with that childhood trauma, and then we're going to talk about the potential for change, which is really what we're all about. As coaches, we want to facilitate change, lasting change. So let's dive in, Kristin, and let's talk about a new way of looking at trauma. So I'm going to ask you a question first.
Okay.
What was your understanding of trauma pre-becoming a coach and starting to do this work yourself?
I think the word trauma, and still, I think when I first hear it, it's always some awful, catastrophic, horrible thing that's happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you've had a normal, quote unquote, normal life, you know, in America and all the things, it's like, no, trauma, no.
I'm not traumatized.
No, I'm not. I haven't had any big trauma. Who am I to have issues? Because I haven't had a big trauma. We tend to think of trauma as this big, huge thing. That's for me anyway. And it was until, you start looking at things, you're going, okay, well, that kind of, for me at the time, that was traumatic and it wasn't okay.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that was for me. How about you?
I think for me too, I went the same way. As like, when I thought of trauma, I thought of like massive catastrophic events. I mean, the obvious ones, like abuse,
Mm-hmm.
something just really that stuck out in your mind, like, wow, that just had a complete turning point in my life kind of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really look at the little things that happen that we kind of ignore. And I like to say these are like the benign traumas or the micro traumas that just happen as a part of being a child and being raised by our parents. So the other thing, as I was reading this book, I started reading, and she's like, if you don't have strong memories of your childhood, this could be an indicator of trauma. Like literally, you were starting to block out certain things that happened as a child. And that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
How do you feel about memories, your memories as a child?
I think, often we attribute that to, well, we were young, we don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I
and
know I
it's,
did. I was like, I just
yeah,
don't remember.
yeah. I was like, well, I was little, I don't really have a whole lot of memories until a certain age, and then it's isolated memories. But I think like her point is so true, because the more you start to think about it, you're like, okay, that didn't feel good. So I repressed it, or I didn't want to see it for what it really was.
Yeah.
I wanted to make it, because my personality is like, I always wanted everything to be happy and good. So I made it in my mind okay, or I just forgot it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she talks about having more feeling memories than actual memories.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of us, like we felt a certain way, but we don't remember what was actually happening. So we disengaged from the actual event or things
Mm-hmm.
that were going on as a way to cope with it. And we just
Yeah.
remember how we felt.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it's funny, there's this notion of, okay, so we dissociated. We have the feeling of it. We don't have the actual memory of it. But she talks about how your body keeps score too. And we've mentioned this too. And this is not a topic we're going to dive heavily into today. But if we're not dealing with that unresolved trauma, a lot of the time, for many of us, me specifically, it's built up in my body. And it took probably many years of unresolved trauma for it to actually surface.
Yeah.
And for it to be something to look at.
It builds up
Yeah,
because it builds up. And especially when you're not even aware of it.
Yeah. So if anyone's curious about how unresolved trauma shows up in the body, don't worry, we're going to be talking about it next month because there's a lot there and there's lots of different ways it shows up.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at this new way of looking at trauma, there's some really good questions we can ask ourselves as we're starting to explore. Like, if nothing traumatic happened to me, why can't I remember most of my childhood? Because we just talked about that. Maybe we have feeling memories, but we don't have actual memories. So if you're in that boat with us, consider, why can't you remember your childhood? And another question could be, why do I have such a hard time connecting with and taking care of myself emotionally? This was me 100%. Yep. It was like, I just can't connect to my emotions. Sometimes I can't even connect to other people. Because I was so used to dissociating. I was telling Kristin right before we jumped on this that, like Dr. Nicole says in her book, like I would literally jump into my spaceship and not be present. Escape hatch. No, I was like, I just don't want to be here. I don't want to experience it. And that was normal for me. What about for you, Kristin?
Oh, I think same. Because wanting everything to feel good. I don't like that feeling of unease. I don't like confrontation. I don't like that feeling.
Guilty.
Always think of Toy Story with that dinosaur. I don't like confrontation. That always comes to my mind, but it's true. And it's almost like even as a young child, I would either go away or I would try to change the subject or I would make a joke or try to change it somehow. Like, no, I can't deal with this.
Yeah. I'm like, in confrontation, I don't know why we've attached such a negative stigma to it. Like, it seems like such a horrible thing. Like, to confront someone sounds maybe antagonistic.
Combative. We've made it a combative term.
It's going to be bad. But no, you're just like confronting a reality and it doesn't have to be a negative one.
No.
But I think that's a lot of people's reality. Like, confrontation is bad. So I'm just going to avoid that at all costs.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Another really good question that I love that Dr. Nicole asks people to answer is, why do I constantly betray myself? It's like, okay. And it's like, we had a women's group last night where we were talking about this very thing of like denying what you actually want because you've probably gotten in a mode of either extreme people pleasing or you just don't even know what you want anymore. Right? Because you've been denying that so long. I just keep betraying myself.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's normal. And
it becomes such a normal thing, such an autopilot response that we don't even consider that you are betraying yourself. It's like, this is just the way it is.
Yeah. So if this hasn't made it clear, trauma at any level affects us all, right? And sometimes we can't pinpoint that specific event that occurred, like that turning point. We didn't have that catastrophic trauma. And Kristin and I always say, we do not discount the catastrophic trauma. Any level of trauma needs to be dealt with because if we don't resolve it, it's going to manifest in some form at some point. Like 100%. Yes. 100% of the time.
100%.
But for a lot of us, there wasn't this grand event. There was just this culmination of kind of micro traumas that a lot of us ignored. We didn't even really see it that way. So today, I hope we can kind of debunk a little bit of that and help you see where maybe some of this was occurring in your life as a child. So I want to shift gears into common ways that this trauma manifests, because I think this will help put it into perspective, especially if you're in the boat like Kristin and I of not having this catastrophic trauma occur. So let us know if these relate to you at all, and we'll kind of talk around some of them because a lot of these are super common with clients we work with.
Yes.
So I'm going to give you the list. If you guys relate to any of these things, very possible you have childhood trauma that is unresolved. Perfectionism, achieving, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, lack of confidence, low self-worth, obsession with being viewed a certain way, problematic relationship behaviors, or stuckness. I think most women I talk to, especially in the demographic we tend to work with, this feeling of stuckness is a huge one. Like
On
getting
many
to a point in
levels.
your life. Yeah. And you're just like, I feel so stuck or so lost
Mhm.
because you've not actually been who you are.
Yeah.
You've been in this autopilot, right?
Or became
So
who you thought you had to be.
yeah. So I want to talk let's spend a few minutes talking about our personal experience with these things and which ones resonated with you. Like how did your trauma manifest, Kristin?
Well, right off the bat, I raised my hand with the perfectionism.
Mm.
But huge perfectionism, overachieving, anxiety, constant, that being in that anxious one, because I wanted to achieve, I wanted to be perfect, I wanted to have all those things happen, which results in lack of confidence and low self-worth, obsession with being viewed a certain way. We were talking a little bit about that before we jumped on to just with my family of origin was modeled for me, and then with the perfectionism piece
Oh yeah.
that is there, um, and then the stuckness, just get that stuckness, whether it was with a job or with you know a family situation, or whether as we've talked, with the motherhood, and just going from thing to thing to thing, and then you finally wake up one day and go, oh my goodness, how did I get here? And
What's
then
happening?
now I don't know what to do about it. I'm unhappy. What do I do with it? How do I change it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. So the stuckness one is the one that probably was the biggest trigger for me to start exploring all the other ones.
Okay.
Because I've shared a story a couple times, and I don't know if I've done it here, of sitting in my living room during the pandemic with my 3-year-old literally bouncing off the walls and thinking, is this my life? Like, how did I end up here? So it started this whole thing. Like I felt so stuck. Like I had been living a life that wasn't really even mine. If that makes any sense. So it made me start looking at all of these different ways that trauma had manifested for me. And I definitely can relate to the perfectionist piece. I always wanted things to be good, great. Took a lot of pride in what I put out into the world and what I did.
Oh yeah.
Definitely overachieving. And a lot of that probably stemmed too from growing up having that achievement mindset and having a sibling that was not the achiever. Definitely some low level anxiety. And it's funny because I would never admit to being an anxious person before, like never. I'm like, no, I don't have anxiety. But as I look back on it, I'm like, yeah, I mean, it was definitely going on in the background. Like I was keeping it a very tolerable level. Like I'm like, it's not affecting my day to day, but it's there. And I wasn't seeing it, which did lead to that lack of confidence. I think that's why I never did the things I felt like I wanted to. There was always an itch to do something. And I was like, oh, it was either too late in my mind, or it's like, I don't have the qualifications, the experience. Who do I think I am? So self-worth.
Yeah.
I was
All those
like,
questions.
all of it. And you think about how you're going to be viewed. So that obsession with being viewed a certain way, all of this comes into play. So if you're listening to this going like, yeah, I check the box on all of these, you're not alone. I was like, it's not usually one. In my case, it may be one thing that leads to the
To all the others.
cascade.
Yes, to all the others. Yes.
But it's usually you're checking multiple boxes here. Like there's a lot of ways trauma is manifested.
100%.
So now that you know, hey, all these wonderful things that are happening in your life could be a result of trauma. Let's take a look at a new definition of trauma. Dr. Nicole would say, when we consistently betrayed ourselves for love, which is now what you may be seeing as we're talking about it, we're consistently treated in a way that made us feel unworthy or unacceptable. We severed the connection to who we actually were as children. And trauma creates the fundamental belief that we must betray who we are in order to survive. We need to become something else for survival.
Mm.
How does that feel when you hear it, Kristin?
It doesn't feel good at all. But you realize that that is the case. I think it's like even whether it's real or not, it's one of those things that is, we interpret our parents or whoever is your caregiver at the moment, like we interpret what they're saying, and then we change. It's like, oh wait, they weren't pleased with that. The look on the face, I mean, sometimes it's not overt, it's not like something that was said. And so yeah, we do and so we're like, okay, well, they didn't like that, so I can't do that anymore. And you start to change who you are to become that person, because for survival, we need to stay in the family, or we need to stay in this community, or we um so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think that intensely about it. Like it's a survival tactic,
Mhm.
because I don't think that's what we thought when we were doing it, obviously. We didn't think, oh, I'm doing this because I need to survive. Like my life is literally threatened. But I think it's the acceptance piece, right? We want to be accepted. We want to be loved. And for whatever reason, we felt we had to become something to get that love and acceptance.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's a crazy thought that we have become who we are because of how we adapted as children.
Mhm.
And with that in mind, I want to kind of lead us into childhood conditioning, because we talk about this idea of conditioning a lot within this group, and in general, like that we are very much conditioned on autopilot. And I'm going to read a quote from this book, because I was telling Kristin before we even got in here, I'm like, I cannot say this any better than these words. So I want to read this first paragraph from a section of the book in chapter 3. And I just want you guys to like hear this and let it sink in, because it was kind of a mic drop moment for me, especially if you're a parent. A parent figure's role is to be a guide. A loving parental relationship provides a secure base for a child to return to as they venture out into life, with all the ups and downs associated with this great transition. A guide is largely non judgmental, allowing the child to exist as they are.
Mm.
A guide is more likely to observe and act from a state of awareness and wisdom. This allows the child to experience the natural consequences of their actions without intervention, in laying the foundation for them to build self-trust. Think of the guide as a wise teacher, someone who has faith in the foundation they have provided and trusts that the student will be able to weather what life brings. The child then internalizes this faith. This doesn't mean that the child avoids pain, loss, anger, or grief, the wide array of human feelings. Instead, the guide or parent figure has provided a base of security and resilience for the child to return to when hard times come.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. And if only we could all do that 100% of the time, how wonderful it would be.
Well, it's like if we had read that going into motherhood, or we had been able to absorb that, like, what is my role as a mother or a parent, whatever, a parent figure? Because some of us come into families where we didn't birth the children too, right? But we're
Mhm.
still like a parent figure. And what is our role as a parent? What did
Mhm.
we desire as children that maybe we didn't get? Because
Mhm.
our parents didn't understand their role and their parents didn't
You
understand their
stand there,
role. I
I
mean,
guess.
this is so deep seated. So it kind of leads beautifully into this idea, like as you're listening to this, trauma is intergenerational. It is passed down generation by generation, and maybe it gets a little bit diffused or it changes slightly,
Changes, yeah.
but ideally, I mean, really, if you think about it, your mother or your father is whatever their parents
Their
were, and
parents
vice,
were.
like it's just a trickle down.
Yeah.
And yeah, things can get watered down through the generations, but some of those like really hard and fast messages, the ones that have a lot of deep roots, those stuck. And it creates this conditioning. And if you guys aren't clear on what conditioning actually means when we say you are conditioned, it just means your beliefs and behaviors are unconsciously imprinted onto you, meaning you didn't even know it was happening. It was just part of your upbringing.
Oh, it's just the facts. That's just
Yeah.
how it is.
Yeah. I mean, and we learn what is modeled to us, right? You think about a child, you watch a child, you see this so clearly. Look at a young child. Either they're a parrot, right? Because they're repeating what they hear, or they're modeling the same behaviors. I catch myself with my son, who's 4, all the time being like, oh my gosh, he like picked that up from me, like phrases,
Oh yeah.
ways of being, facial expression.
Mannerisms, yes.
Yeah.
All the things, yeah. And both good and bad,
Mhm.
that's the thing.
Yeah.
We're talking about trauma, and so that's a more negative connotation, but it's also conditioning is both ways. And I think, when you were talking about, when you're reading that passage, what just came to mind was just the thought of, how beautiful that would be. And why don't we do that? Why is that not a natural thing that we do? And it's because of all the conditioning and all the ways that throughout the generations, we have not been aware. We have
Mhm.
not consciously, our parents didn't, we didn't, if it just always goes back to me, it's like, oh, we should start life with this type of training. We
Yeah.
need to, just learn how to do these things from the beginning so that we can hopefully not create these traumas and not create these issues. If we would just be students of life, and if we could deal with our own stuff. I think that's where you were going before, with the before you have a child. It's like, if you dealing with your own stuff is going to make you such a beautiful parent, because you're going to understand why you do what you do, and when you respond a certain way, you're like, oh wait, and stop yourself and reframe, recondition, redo.
Yeah.
So
Yep. And if you're listening to any of this and you're starting to feel any shame around
mm,
where you're at as a parent specifically, don't. This is not intended to put shame on anyone, as like we've all had our own feelings of shame as we've gone on this healing journey. And if you go down this road, those feelings of shame are going to come up. And they're not to be judged. We didn't know. We only know what we know.
yeah,
So there's no judgment here. If you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm like
I've screwed up
massively messing up
everything.
my kid.
Yes, I've screwed up everything. It's too late for me.
No, and
It's
that's the
not.
thing. It's never too late.
No.
And here's some final thoughts around childhood conditioning. How our parents engaged in their reality is often how we engage in ours. So we
Mm,
literally are mirroring back what we learned from our parents. And when you start this journey, you have to learn to witness yourself and
mm,
your loved ones, right?
mhm, mhm.
How often do we stop and think, is this really me? Or is this my conditioning?
Yeah. Is this what I really feel? Is this what I feel like should be the
Mhm.
response to this?
Yeah. And I mean, part of this is identifying those wounds as
Mm,
you go on this journey. Like, not to say we're all like these wounded animals, but like we have these little micro traumas and we're carrying them with us. If we can recognize that, we're already on our way to healing.
mhm.
That awareness.
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. It's sort of like that, that great pause that we talked about with the pandemic, but it's that constant daily making ourselves pause in the moment and
Mhm.
be aware of what we're doing. Why are we thinking what we're thinking? Why are we responding this way? Where did this come from? And making intentional choice for
Yes.
how you want to respond.
Yeah, and then the I think the next level above that is not judging yourself for it.
Yes.
The
Because
judgment piece is huge because once we go there, we're like, oh my gosh, or we start judging our parents too. Like it becomes this huge judgment fest, right? How your parents treated you as a child is not a reflection of you.
Right.
And it's not even a reflection of them,
Right. Right.
right?
Especially because
So
the conditioning, the intergenerational conditioning that happens, they probably didn't think about what they were doing either.
yeah, it's like we're judging a non-authentic version of ourselves and our parents.
Mhm.
So the
Mhm.
judgment isn't even really fair. I would say if I could leave you with anything around this idea is approach yourself and your loved ones or parents with even more compassion and love than you have before because they didn't know what they were doing.
They did with the best with what they had.
Yeah.
If we
And
could
we all
all
are.
give each if we could all give each other grace in that. And I think that is something that often with parents we don't do, because you felt so strongly about something, perhaps, from your childhood or something that happened then, and we carry that with us for so long. And so then it's an anger response. And so then we can't, it's like either we need to forgive them, or we just, we judge them. Like you said, that judgment just comes out, instead of having the compassion, like, hey, we're all human. That's the condition. We're all
Yeah.
human, and we do with what we know.
Yeah. And I love how if you read this book, Dr. Nicole really talks about how as you go down this road, as you start to heal, you are going to feel anger. You are going to feel compassion all at once, love. And how do you hold those things like together almost in a container?
Mhm.
And that it's okay to feel what you're feeling. But I think if we lean into the compassion side of it, still lets you feel angry, but you also recognize it, none of it's really our fault. No one is to blame. And if we get away from the I'm trying to blame someone,
Mhm. Mhm.
we can really step into that true healing. If we're still trying to blame, there's work to be done, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think
I
this
always
is,
think of the denial piece too,
oh
is,
yeah.
that's such a, initially, you deny that it's the way it is. Like, oh wait, no, I don't feel that way.
Well, and that's our coping mechanism, right?
Mhm.
We deny our reality. Like, no, this isn't really happening. We always joke that I'm fine, we're fine, I'm fine.
Yes.
Everything's
It's
fine.
okay.
And it's like, is it really? And it's okay if it's not.
Mhm.
Just means you're aware now and you want to heal. So I think this is a really good segue into the archetypes of childhood trauma, because this is really where it becomes real. Because you may be thinking at this point, okay, what would that have looked like as as a child? What would I have experienced? So there's these archetypes Dr. Nicole lays out in her book that kind of make it clear what this childhood trauma can look like. And she'll say you may identify with one more heavily than another, but you could identify with all of these that we're going to talk about. It's not an and or. It's like figuring out where the trauma resides so you know where to look. You know what to explore. So, let's start with the first archetype. Having a parent who denies your reality. So, if you had a parent who denied your reality, it might sound something like they would tell you, it didn't happen that way. It's not a big deal. You should just forget about it. And for me, I don't really resonate that heavily with this particular archetype for myself, but I've
Mhm.
seen other people that
Mhm.
really resonate with this one.
Yeah.
And I think the question here, if this is resonating with you, is how did that make you feel as a child when they denied your reality? What do you
Just
think about this
it,
one?
it discounts the child. It discounts, like it tells you that your feelings aren't valid. It tells you can't rely on your feelings too.
And how do you
Um,
think that's showing up for you as an adult?
yeah,
Do you think your feelings are valid? Do you speak up?
right. Or you've become a very angry person because you've never been validated.
Mhm. So this can show up a lot of different ways.
Hmm.
So that's
Hmm.
archetype one. Second archetype is having a parent that does not see or hear you. And this is the kind of parent that would always seem distracted or busy or otherwise made you feel unacknowledged. And questions to ask yourself around this archetype are, how did you try to get their attention? If this was you and you're like, my parents never paid attention to me, or I felt invisible, did you perform or act out, or did you become withdrawn? And for me, I know when I was talking about this one with Kristin, I relate to this one. I'm definitely more on the withdrawn side. And that's how it played out in adulthood too. It's like if I felt like people didn't see or hear me, I wouldn't really fight for them to see or hear me. I would just like, whatever, I'll just withdraw. It's like not worth it. What about you, Kristin?
I think I had at times a blend of both. You know, and just depending on the situation. But sometimes it was like, and sadly, I think it was usually I would have to be pushed to the brink, kind of thing, of be angry about something. And then I would stick up for myself, or I would make a big deal about it. But for the most part, I also was just like, okay, well, whatever. Not that important.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And it's like, if I really think about it, I'm like, were there times I acted out to try and get attention? Very rarely.
Yeah.
Or they weren't intentional. But maybe like now that I'm looking at it so far removed, maybe those were ways I was trying to get attention. Maybe when I was in 7th grade smoking in the back of the field and getting caught, that was acting out. I didn't see it
You think?
that way.
Yeah, you think? Yeah.
Because I would try and diffuse it too. Like I wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm doing this because, I'm trying to like get your attention. But looking back, are there times where we may have done things because we needed to get attention?
Yeah.
We didn't feel like we were getting attention. So that's another one to look at. Third archetype, having a parent who vicariously lives through you or molds and shapes you. I know a lot of people that relate to this one.
Yes, a lot of people do.
And this can kind of sound like you're so sensitive, like your mother. You need to get straight A's to make the family proud. Anything where they were kind of projecting what they wanted out of you, fairly regularly. Like it was all about what you could achieve or do, or they were trying to mold you in some way. So this one I definitely can connect to on a certain level. I think about playing sports and having, what I thought at the time almost like a crazy sideline dad. I don't know if anyone else had that. It kind of took the joy out of sports for me, even at a young age. And I kept playing. And part of it's like, did I play because he wanted me to, or did I actually enjoy it? I think there was a little bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my dad was fairly benign compared to other parents I've seen in sports. Like this can be a total minefield, like the whole crazy sports parents. And like pushing kids into like being the best and, telling friends things like they're going to the Olympics. Have you heard that one? And you're like, wow.
Okay.
Wow. What standard are you holding your child to? And is that really fair? So I don't know.
Or academically,
Yes.
that happens a lot.
You're going to Stanford. You're
going
going
to Harvard.
Yeah. I'm just like, or you're going to be a doctor. It's like all those kinds of things. And it's like, my husband is one of these people. Yeah. His dad was a doctor. And guess what? He's a doctor too. Yep. He was the only son that showed promise. You will be a doctor. It's like, okay. So this is a really big one for people.
Yeah. Expectations.
Questions to ask yourself if you're feeling really connected to this archetype is, were you as impassioned and committed to those goals that your parents were setting for you as they were? Or did you simply go through the motions? Like you're like, whatever, I'm going to go along with it. It was easier to not fight it.
Yeah, easier than fighting.
Yep. And the other question would be, what messages did you receive about yourself as a child? What did your parents want or expect of you? And I think the flip side of that now is, how is that showing up for you today? What kind of expectations have you set for yourself? And maybe what expectations do your parents continue to set
It's
for
still, yeah,
you?
still have for you.
Because you've never broken that out of that box.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this is a big one. I mean, this is some people's whole identity completely.
Absolutely.
The achiever.
Because that, because it's always back there. As much as you think like, I'm an adult and I've taken on my life, it's still back there. You still hear your parents.
Yeah. I mean, even this comes down to parents who think like money is everything. How much money are you making? Or ask those kinds of questions. I remember I've been around people who ask that question to their kids and other people, and it always made me really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh, you just got that new job. How much are you making? I'm like,
None of your
that's kind of
business.
personal. That's none
None
of
of
your
your
business.
business.
And I was like, is it all about money? So it's like
Mm.
really looking at what were the messages you were told? Because if
Mhm.
you're a person who's constantly been chasing the money or the power, when did you start receiving those messages?
Mhm. Yeah.
And are you still playing into it? So it's big. That's a big one, I think.
A lot of
The
people.
next one is having a parent who does not model boundaries. Parents who violated your personal limits or those of others or didn't have boundaries themselves.
Mhm.
So, I mean, this is a big one. Did you feel when you were a child like you could say no? I'm going to ask you this, Kristin. Like, when you think back to your childhood, did you feel like you could say no?
Um, yes and no.
Yes and no.
Yes and
Sort
no.
of.
It's like you kind of, I did feel like I had the permission um in certain things, but there were certain things that you just didn't question. Like
Yeah.
this is how it is, and you better abide by it because that's what we do.
Mhm.
And like you, just like you, being the good child, it's like no, I have to go along with it.
Yep. I'm going to do that. I'm going to be the good girl.
Yep.
Um, were you told to behave a certain way? And I don't, I
Yes.
remember my childhood and I remember what I keep being told as an adult, like you were the easiest child.
Mm,
Like we could take you anywhere, we could do
mhm.
anything. You were just so agreeable.
Yeah. Yeah.
To this day,
Yep.
that is me. And it's like I can't really remember the being told to behave a certain way, but at some point I must have decided that I needed to.
I better behave this way. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So there's lots of different questions you can ask yourself around this one and the boundaries, because boundaries, I mean, come on, Kristin, this is like a universal theme with most of the women we talk to. Either the inability to set boundaries or stick to them.
Mhm.
Maybe having too many boundaries in place is a problem for some people too. When you think about your parents, did they set clear limits on their time, energy, and resources in their relationships? Or was it kind of a free for all? It's like kind of a question to consider here too.
Yeah.
And I remember my mom, like a really good example of my mom was I remember her always wanting to entertain people. Like that was a big
Mm,
thing for her, like having people in the house entertaining. She liked caring for people and making
mhm.
them feel welcome. But behind all of it, behind the scenes, what you wouldn't see was the stress,
Yeah.
like the work that had to actually go into it.
Mhm.
And not to say she didn't enjoy the actual entertainment piece of it. She would tell you, she's like, yeah, I mean, I love having people in my house and I love cooking and doing all the things, but there's also this stress.
Yeah. I
So,
think I modeled that one I modeled for my children.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really common. And I think as women, we like taking care of people.
Yeah.
And this is kind of when our people pleasing started to happen, even as children. We're seeing it modeled by our parents. Like,
Mhm.
oh, we just do these things. Um, Another really good way boundaries can be explored as far as your childhood is, did your parents respect your privacy or did they invade it?
Mm,
And I don't really have any, I don't think we had privacy issues in my family. There were boundaries around like what was allowed, Like
Yeah.
you don't bring boys into your room
Right.
and shut the door kind of thing, but
Right.
not like we're peeking in and we're trying to see what's happening. But I know lots of people who had that, like parents who
Mhm.
would read diaries or like be listening to all the conversations they were having.
I know. I know. There's and I think that's a boundary too. And that's a thing people, and too many parents cross it in the vein of protection. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, but there's got to be a balance. And
Mhm. Well, and just think about how it feels to have someone watching you or lurking all
doesn't
the
feel
time.
good. Does not feel good
Even as an
at
adult,
all.
you're kind of like, you, no personal space, no boundaries.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
like it. Like
Yeah.
something doesn't feel right about it. So that's
Mhm.
something to look at. Like, was that something that was real for you as a child? The other, I think this last question is a really good one too, because this reminds me of the current generation of helicopter parents.
Mm.
Did your parents allow you to have conversations or experiences with others without inserting themselves into it? This
Yes.
reminds me of the moms that want to be best friends with their kids
Yes.
and like Mean Girls. The movie Mean Girls.
Yes, that's the
I'm not
perfect.
a normal mom, I'm a cool mom. And you're just like,
I'm the cool mom.
really?
Mhm.
You don't have to be in every aspect of your child's life to be a parent or to be like seen as the cool parent. And I feel like a lot of moms in particular get themselves in a lot of trouble when they try and be the best friend
Be
or
the
try and
best friend.
insert themselves too much. It's like,
Yeah.
where is the line between being the friend and the parent?
Yeah.
And where are you not even giving your kids autonomy
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
trust?
That's a huge one. That's a huge one.
Yeah. So boundaries.
Boundaries
Boundaries are
are
big.
rough for everybody.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to go down the list now. There are two more, and these are big ones, especially for women, since women are mostly listening to this. Did you have a parent who is overly focused on appearance? They
Oh yeah.
provided direct and indirect messages about your appearance. Things like, you should wear your hair down, your thighs are getting bigger. Do you really think it's a good idea to have seconds? You'd look a lot better if you didn't have clothes like that. These kinds of messages. And they kind of seem, innocent a lot of the time. And if you heard them a lot, if you were like me, I remember hearing messages like this. My mom was an aerobics instructor. Like fitness and health and looking good were important to her. I don't think she would deny that. And that clearly was a message she received too as a child at some level. But the more you heard messages like this, at least for me, the more I kind of dissociated. I was like, I'm just not going to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to hear it. I'm not going to listen. And it's funny because I'd have friends witness some of these conversations and try and come to my defense. And they're
Yeah.
like, no, you don't have to do that. Like, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Um, how do you feel about this one, Kristen?
Oh, this one's big on, for me personally, but then so many women that I have talked to, or even older ladies that I've talked to. It's just so sad how pervasive and how long it stays with you.
Mhm.
Um, when it's been such a focus in your life. It was either a parent, or sometimes it's an extended family members.
Yeah.
um, and again, with that intergenerational thing, is sometimes it's like a family thing, and it becomes this huge, like it's constant, it's always there. It's like every conversation, every comment, everything. It's like, wow, it's like, and like you said, you start to just, well, that's just normal, that's just normal. But if a friend comes along, it's like, whoa, what? No, it's not normal, that's not right. Yeah, no, for me personally, like, yeah, so it was the appearance piece was huge. We were the example. You had to be the example. You had to look a certain way.
Mhm.
You couldn't wear certain clothes because of certain reason. It was just
Yeah.
it was a whole thing.
It is a whole thing. And then I think too, like there's some people that maybe experience this with in a way that may be seen positively, like the parent that always told them how pretty they were
Mm.
all the time. And it was all about being pretty or being cute or, oh, you're adorable, like all the time. and thinking how that manifests too.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's big and you don't even really think about it.
Mhm.
And I mean, like you said, this isn't always a parent doing it. This could
Mhm.
have been some other formative person in your life being like,
Right.
oh my gosh, you're just like the cutest, like constantly. So then it's like, this is who you're shaping yourself to be, and this is what you're carrying forward. And it's like,
Mhm.
what pressure are you putting on yourself to always be this cute, pretty, well put together person? And
Yeah.
is that who you really are, who you were taught to be?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And it sticks with you for a very long time. If you're
it,
not, especially when you're not aware of it, it's just a pattern. It's a thing that you just keep doing.
it
And it
does.
really messes with your head.
Yeah. And I think the last thing to kind of look at here too is that sometimes these statements are not always directed at you, they're directed at others, and you just got to witness them. Like maybe
Mhm.
you had people in your life that would criticize other people's appearances.
Mhm.
And what did that teach you about being critical of other people and their appearance? Do you
And
find
also
yourself
you can,
judging?
yeah, exactly, because that becomes a pattern because it's in your, it's that thought process, is that's the automatic thought process. And then on the flip side, it also can be, if they're saying that about them, what do they think about me?
Mm.
If you are whatever they're criticizing, if you've been that way, or you've looked that way, or like, okay, they're saying that about them, but so what do they feel about me?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I think the final thought I would have here is like if you really deeply resonate with this one, asking yourself what are the messages you received around appearance as a child and really starting to take a look at that and how that's showing up for you today.
Mhm.
Because we all have choices in how we show up now as adults. We are adults and we are in choice. And we always like to remind people, clients, women of this. You are in choice. And if something's not serving you today, it's your choice. Continue with how it's been or make a change.
Yeah, exactly.
The last one, and this is a big one, and I think this impacts most women I know at some level, is having a parent who cannot regulate their emotions.
Mm,
And this looks different for
mhm,
everyone.
mhm,
Like we've said already, we learn by watching our parents. When your parents had strong emotions, how did they respond? Did they do things like slam doors, vent, scream, give you the silent treatment? Did they have a specific coping strategy when they were upset?
mhm,
Would they spend money? Would they use substances? Avoid certain or all emotions? And for me, that was a big one too. It's like I saw so much avoidance on
mm,
both sides.
mhm,
Anything that would happen between my parents would happen behind closed doors.
mm.
We were shielded from it. So, what does that tell you as a child? That emotions are for having behind closed doors?
Exactly.
We don't
You
express
don't show
ourselves.
them. You don't show them to anyone.
Yeah, we don't express ourselves openly.
Mhm,
Um, it's a lot to look at
yeah.
because I mean, you think now as parents, I think this is where it shows up the most for me. We look at our children and we look at their ability to regulate their own emotions.
Mhm.
Where have they learned their strategies for coping? Right here.
You always, and then that's the thing, is that you see very, very blatantly in your face how you respond, because they parrot, they model.
Yeah. I got to watch this with my son, who's, like I said, only 4,
Yeah.
seeing how different I was versus even my husband because of how our childhoods were different. My
Mhm.
husband leaned into anger much more than I would. And then I would judge it. Like, why
Mm,
are you getting so angry?
yeah.
And then he was probably judging me on the flip side because I was a little bit more passive, like, oh, let's just ignore him or let's not make a big deal about it. Instead of
Yeah.
just being like, let's let our kid feel what he's feeling.
Right.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So when your parents had strong emotions, Kristin, how did they communicate with you around those emotions? Or did they communicate with you?
I think a lot of it was it'll just like yours, more, private. We deal with this on the side, or if it came up, during a family vacation or something like that, it was definitely shut down quickly,
Yeah.
and it was, so
Get rid of it.
then it was just awkward for everyone.
Anyone else have awkward emotional interactions with their parents? Because that's one flip side. I say that's kind of our experience. Like it was the shutdown. Let's just shut it down. Let's not experience it. For some people, it's like the complete opposite. It becomes name calling, blaming, shaming, like
This
just
explosive.
explosive in front of the kids.
Yeah.
And if that was you, that's a whole other experience. Like look at how you're showing up in that way now, especially as a parent. Is that what your default is?
Mhm, mhm.
And can you catch yourself?
Yeah.
Can you catch yourself? So I love these last two questions around this archetype. After strong feelings that your parents were having, so think back, did your parents take time to explain or help you process your own feelings around what happened? No.
Nope. No.
Or be like,
We-
hey, how do you feel about this? Or did they take time to be like, this is what's going on in this situation, and how do you feel about it? This is what I'm feeling. How do you feel about it?
Mhm.
And what messages did we receive in general about our feelings in just our everyday life? Was it an open conversation? Did you have feeling conversations? I don't really remember
I don't remember.
having feeling conversations.
No.
Um, maybe sometimes, but in my mind, they felt more confrontational than productive. So it's like, how do we get to that space where these kinds of conversations are the norm
Mhm.
and they're like productive conversations? Like I truly want to know how you're feeling without judgment. Because then we can choose how we respond. So that was a lot. Right?
Yeah.
Spent a lot of time talking about the archetypes. So we're going to quickly go through the coping and the potential for change because we want to wrap this up. We want to respect your time.
Yes.
But you got to come full circle. So we want to cope. We recognize, okay, I fit into one or more of these archetypes. How might we have been coping with this for our whole lives? And maybe you've not realized it up to this point. So this is really just common coping mechanisms that we're going to talk about. And I think I've talked about these with pretty much every person I've ever worked with. People pleasing.
Yes. We just
I
talked about
already
that
talked
last
about.
night in group.
Yeah. But what's actually happening when you do this, right? There's a stress. So you default to people pleasing because the stress is then temporarily gone. It's like you're trying to manage it. It's like, I just want to get rid of it. I'm
Diffuse
going
the
to say yes, or I'm
situation.
going to say no. Yeah. Like diffuse.
Yeah.
Diffuse. Then you don't have to deal with it.
Mhm.
Right? You're not resolving anything. Like I said, like the stress is temporarily gone, really, because how many women get mad at themselves for this one? I mean, we were having this conversation with some women last night around like, why can't I just say no? And I'm like, that's the perfect question to ask yourself, right?
Yeah.
Why can't you?
What is it? What is it?
And what did you do in your childhood? Because it's probably deeply ingrained in you. And I think, like most women, I would say most women I've talked to are guilty of people pleasing at some level. There are exceptions. Some have no interest in pleasing other people. And we're not judging either way. We're just saying this
Yeah.
is some ways you may be coping with it,
Exactly.
with your trauma. Another one is anger or rage. You discharge emotion onto someone else to release it. How many people use that as a way to cope? Like you just go off.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue this has been my husband mostly. That's his way of discharging the stress. Like I'm just going to like vomit on you.
Mm.
And we've all experienced people like this, if it's not us personally, where you're just like, whoa, where is that
Where'd
coming
that come from? Yeah.
But that's what they know to do. That is part of the conditioning, and that is a way we cope with specific trauma. especially if that's what was modeled to us, right?
You're right. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
spew it out there.
Yeah.
So that's another coping mechanism. The last one, and this is my favorite and probably my go-to, is dissociation. You leave your body during a stressful event so that you don't experience it.
Mm.
It's like, nope, I'm just going to jump on my little spaceship right now and I'll be back when this is done.
I want to feel that.
Yeah. I was like, how
Yeah.
many connect to that? Like, yep, I just don't want to be in this situation at all. So I'm just going to like temporarily leave my body. I mean, we're not physically leaving our body, but you get the gist of that, right? You will yourself to not be present. Didn't happen. And I said, this is the crux of I'm fine, we're fine, it's all fine. So good, right? So think about how you're coping right now with your trauma, now that you've realized you probably have childhood trauma. So let's talk about change as we wrap this up. It's not the severity of the trauma, clearly, but our reaction to it that leaves the imprint on us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whether you had catastrophic trauma or not, you had micro trauma, you can relate to the archetypes you're talking about. You experienced some form of trauma.
Yeah.
And we love the word resilience, right? We love the word resilience. Who doesn't love to be called resilient? Because it's like, yeah, I've been through some hard shit.
Yeah, I got this.
Yeah, and someone sees that, like, I got to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Nicole talks about resilience being learned through conditioning.
Mm.
And sometimes resilience is a good thing, and other times it's not. Like we built up the other kind of resilience. It's like the trauma resilience because we're not looking at it. It's like,
Yeah.
no, don't want to deal with that.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like looking at resiliency a little bit different too. What kind of resiliency do you want to develop in your life?
Mm-hmm.
If we didn't see something modeled by our parents, we may have never learned it. And I think this is a big part of the potential for change, is like realizing you may still have some stuff to learn. You're going to learn and unlearn.
Yeah.
The great unlearning.
Yes. Yes.
And the great
relearning. That's exactly.
Relearn. But when we do this work of resolving these traumas, in effect, we're becoming more resilient. And this is where profound transformation actually becomes possible. Right? And now we're learning to model something completely different for our children.
Yeah. Well, and it's our choice. It's thought out and intentional.
Yes.
And that feels good.
Yeah. I mean, how good does it feel like when we are in choice?
Mm-hmm.
And we've neglected for so many years to realize we've been in choice this whole time. We've just been responding out of default, conditioning, autopilot. So it's like a whole new world when you start to wrap your mind around the notion that you've always been in choice. And guess what? Now that you're aware, that choice is going to become really powerful for you. I think the other thing we want to mention here too is like the obvious. Trauma is unavoidable. I like this notion. Birth is trauma. When you came into this world, that was traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to happen. We can't avoid it, but we don't have to repeat patterns that are no longer serving us. So the whole idea here through this whole episode has been like, when you do the work, you have the ability to change. You can move forward and you can heal.
Yeah. You're not stuck in the patterning that you received. Mm-hmm. You're not stuck.
Yeah. So for anyone wanting steps to move forward, this is where we're going to talk about it. And we'll keep talking about this stuff as we go on this journey. But just to give you some quick points about where to start. Step 1, know what you're dealing with. Identify the unresolved trauma. Everything we're talking about right now. Go back, listen to this episode again. If you want like more, you want to dig in a little bit more, you're like, oh, what was that archetype? Go listen. Figure out what you're dealing with. Step 1. The next step, understand the long-term effects and how you've learned coping strategies and that they're keeping you stuck. So the way you've been showing up is in effect a result of your childhood trauma. And that's what's keeping you stuck. That feeling of stuckness really doesn't have anything to do with your current circumstances. That's the crazy part, right? Because we want to make it about now. Something's happening now that's making me feel stuck, but it's like, let's go back. Let's go back a few more layers and we're going to find out what's really making us feel stuck. And obviously, there's going to be a lot more beyond this. This is scratching the surface, but this is where you start. So, any final thoughts you want to leave the ladies with, Kristin?
The only final thought would just be that keeps coming up with the, don't be in denial. I think, and I think that's because that was me on a certain level. There were certain things that were brought to my attention, or as you start to think about them and you're aware of them, is that you're like, oh no, no, that wasn't really how it was it? Or not wanting to look at it, the fear that comes in of, okay, well, am I being disloyal? Am I being harsh, or or not compassionate, kind of thing. Or there's also, there's those pieces of, am I ready to see why I do this, where it all came from, and am I ready to make the change? And I think being brave would be the second piece. Don't deny, and be brave enough to look at it and to deal with it, and just know it's exciting because you have the choice.
Mhm.
All of it's a choice. I think so often, I've heard myself say it, and I hear other women, well, I just don't have any choice. This is just how it is. I don't have a choice. And it's like, stop yourself from that notion. You always have a choice.
Yep. Such a good reminder. You always do have a choice.
Mhm.
And I think the only thing I would add would be try and release the judgment
Yes.
of yourself and of other people. And it's hard
That's
because
huge.
as it comes to the surface, you're going to experience resistance, especially as you bring it forth to other people, let alone yourself. Like you're
Yeah.
judging yourself, but like I was telling Kristin, as I've been doing this and like I'm publicly talking about things that have happened in my life, I'm not hiding it. Stuff comes up with people that I've mentioned, and it's just a reality of it. And I always want to remind anyone in my life that's being affected by my own healing that it's not about them. It's not. I mean, it's easy to make everything about us.
Mhm.
What did I do to you? Like, oh, what do you need from me? And it's like, it's really not even about that.
Mhm.
This is my work.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not asking anyone else to change because we know that's basically insane. We cannot demand change from other people. We can only work on ourselves. So if I could leave you with one final thought as you maybe embark on this journey, or if you're already in it or thinking about it, release the judgment.
And
Love
I
and
would just
compassion.
add, forgive yourself.
Yeah, forgive yourself and forgive other people. That's been a part of my journey too.
Mhm.
It's like, it's so easy to blame and shame. And it's like the power in forgiveness.
It
It's
only
no one's,
hurts you. It only hurts you.
it's
If
no
you,
one's fault. So I know this is a long one
I say
today.
yes.
There was
Sorry
a
for.
lot. We're sorry we went so long. I hope this has been really helpful. Like we said, just scratching the surface on healing, but there was a lot to talk about in terms of dealing with the past. And I know this brings up lots of emotions and feelings for so many people. And I think the whole goal was here, like to let you know that you're not alone in those feelings, that Kristin and I, these are things we're still processing too. Like
Yeah.
it's not ending, but it gets easier. It gets easier to talk about those feelings that come up and to feel good about them. Like it's part of the cleansing, I'd almost say, like
Yes.
you're cleansing yourself. So we hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday. We can't wait to see you guys next week. Drop any comments below, questions. We'd love to interact with you guys. I always say, if you want to have a conversation offline, join us either on Tuesdays or Thursdays. We always drop the times in the groups. And yeah, we would love to get to know you guys better, and talk about anything that comes up for you. So
Yeah, remember safe space and community. And if any of these things resonated with you, so often we feel like we're so alone. And that's what we're trying to build here with community is we can all talk about it. So jump on, join us.
join us, and we will see you next week.
Take care.